I'd been riding north for 3 days when I saw the first glint of sunlight catch on something that shouldn't have been there. Straight lines, angles, symmetry against the chaos of snowdrifts. It was early afternoon, though the Alaskan winter made it feel closer to dusk. The light had that silvery, brittle quality that comes only when the cold has bitten deep enough to mute even the color of the sky. My snowmobile purred beneath me, the engine humming like a heartbeat I was borrowing, fragile and temporary. I was alone, which wasn't unusual for me. I'd done this stretch before, unmarked tundra west of the Talkeetnas, but never this late in the season. The wind could shear skin, and the landscape was one wrong turn away from swallowing you whole. I wasn't here for sport. I was here for solitude, for silence, for that strange peace that came when I realized just how small I really was. The air burned when I breathed. The sound of the engine faded behind my helmet. I'd been following a line of old trail markers that had half collapsed beneath the snow, thin wooden posts like gravestones sticking out of the white. That's when I saw it, a shape just off the ridge where the ice caught the light like glass. I slowed, leaning forward, the machine hissing to a stop. For a second, I thought it might be a frozen pond or a lake crusted over, but then the wind shifted and I saw what it really was. Tents. 3 of them, maybe 4, their outlines buried in the snow but still standing. Canvas pale blue, stiff and slick with frost. Around them, a few dark mounds, sleeping bags, gear, maybe even people, were half encased in ice. The whole thing shimmered like a sculpture, a perfect tableau caught mid-movement. I killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed in like weight. The wind had carved the snow around the site into smooth, unnatural shapes as though it had been trying to erase what it couldn't. I swung my leg off the sled, boots sinking deep, and trudged toward the camp. Every step crunched like breaking glass. When I got close enough, I saw the faces. They were people. 4 of them. Maybe 5, though it was hard to tell. One was kneeling beside a fire pit, the kind you dig shallow to block the wind. The wood inside was gray with frost, but the logs still looked mid-burn, as if the flames had vanished mid-flicker. Another figure stood a few feet away, one arm raised, mouth open, not in surprise, but in terror. The ice had caught the shape of their expression perfectly. It was as if someone had taken a single moment of chaos and poured glass over it. The strangest part was the detail. Tiny things. The texture of their jackets, the laces on their boots, the wrinkles on their gloves were preserved like fossils. Even strands of hair seemed to hang midair, frozen in motion. I circled the nearest figure slowly, my breath fogging against my visor. Their eyes were open, not rolled back or clouded like I'd expect from someone dead in the cold, but clear, glistening, and somehow alive beneath the frost. I took a step back. My pulse started to hammer in my chest. The storm must have come fast, I told myself. Maybe they froze together, or maybe some freak weather hit this valley. Alaska was full of weird cold pockets, wind funnels, and flash freezes that killed quick. Still, this wasn't natural. I tried to focus on the practical. Maybe I could salvage coordinates, report it. Maybe there were still ID tags or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't dead. I reached for the one kneeling by the fire. Their hand was outstretched, palm up, as if reaching for warmth that never came. The ice was cloudy there, uneven, the shape of their fingertips just visible beneath. I hesitated, then extended my glove and brushed the frost from their wrist. The moment I made contact, something shifted beneath the ice. It was so slight I almost thought I imagined it. The faintest twitch under the translucent skin like a muscle spasm. Then, through the thin veil of frost, I saw movement. The eye beneath the ice rolled, slow and deliberate until it was looking directly at me. I stumbled backward, slipping in the snow. My breath caught hard in my chest. For a second I couldn't even process it, because eyes don't move when they're frozen. Eyes don't track motion when the rest of the body is locked in ice. But I'd seen it. I was sure of it. The wind kicked up again, and something moaned, long, low, and hollow. I turned, scanning the tree line, but the sound wasn't coming from there. It was coming from the camp. Somewhere inside that circle of frozen bodies, something was making noise. The air grew sharper, heavier, and I realized the temperature was dropping fast. The light dimmed, the sun bleeding out behind a thick front of clouds that had rolled in from nowhere. My fingers tingled. I took another step back toward the snowmobile, heart pounding, the hairs on my neck lifting like static. And then, just before I reached it, I saw something else. At the far edge of the camp, beyond the tents, there was a figure that didn't look quite right. Unlike the others, it wasn't completely frozen. The ice around it was thinner, almost translucent, as if it had been caught later, or as if it had begun to thaw. Its head was turned away from me, but its stance was wrong. Bent forward slightly, shoulders crooked, one arm halfway raised like it was reaching for something. And when the wind blew through again, scattering snow across the tents, I heard a faint creak, the sound of something shifting under tension. The head of that half-frozen figure began to turn. The head turned too slowly to make sense, like the ice itself resisted movement. It creaked, fractured, then resumed the same motion, a neck twisting toward me, 1 degree at a time through brittle resistance. The sound wasn't human. It was the sound of a frozen tree limb bending before it snaps. I froze, unable to do anything except watch. The figure's chin angled toward the light, and flakes of ice fell from its face like powdered glass. Beneath the translucent frost, I could make out darkened skin, a cheekbone, lips split open mid-breath. Its eyes were half clouded, pupils a dull gray blue. Then, impossibly, they blinked. Not fully, just a twitch of the lids like the memory of motion. It was subtle, but it made something inside me recoil. Every instinct screamed that I needed to move. I stumbled backward through the snow toward my sled. The camp seemed to shift around me as I did, shadows lengthening, colors draining from the air. The tents no longer looked pale blue but gray, sagging inward like bodies exhaling. My gloves shook as I grabbed the ignition cord and yanked. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I tried again. Still nothing. I glanced back over my shoulder. The figure that had moved was now facing me completely. Its body hadn't stepped forward, but its posture was different, straighter, like it had pulled itself loose from whatever held it. Behind it, the other frozen form seemed to lean subtly toward me, as if gravity had changed direction. I squeezed the throttle again, desperate. The engine screamed to life, coughing out a plume of white exhaust. I swung my leg over, ready to bolt. That's when I heard it, the first crack. It came from behind me, sharp and wet, like breaking a sheet of lake ice with a hammer. Then another, then another. The sound multiplied until the entire clearing was alive with splintering. I turned just long enough to see it happen. Thin fractures spiderwebbing across the surface of the ice that encased each body. It ran down their limbs, across faces along tent poles. Everything began to move, infinitesimally at first, then with growing violence, like a slow-motion explosion. The fire pit split open, embers that had been dead for who knows how long spilling into the snow like dull red stones. The figure I'd touched earlier was shaking, its arm twitching against the ice that pinned it, the eyelids flickering like a moth trapped in glass. The noise became unbearable, a chorus of cracking and moaning from the shifting frost. I gunned the throttle. The snowmobile leapt forward, treads throwing snow into a blizzard behind me. I didn't look back again, not for at least a full minute, but even through my helmet I could hear it. A scream, muted, warped by the distance and the wind. Not human anymore, not fully, but filled with an agony that made my stomach twist. I rode hard for another 10 minutes, following my own tracks back toward the ridge. The wind had picked up, snow whipping so thick that I could barely see beyond the headlight beam. Every few seconds, I'd check behind me, half expecting something to be there, some dark shape gliding just beyond visibility. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I realized how wrong the world felt. The air was heavy and strangely warm, as if the storm was pushing heat from below instead of cold from above. The snow had turned to a fine mist, clinging to my visor like sweat. I lifted it just to breathe clearer. That's when I smelled it. Rot. Not the sharp metallic smell of frozen decay, but something sweeter, deeper, like wet soil that had been disturbed after years of stillness. The light ahead of me dimmed again, flickering slightly. My sled's headlight wasn't failing. It was the snow itself, swirling into faint shapes that almost looked like silhouettes. I told myself it was exhaustion. Dehydration, maybe. I'd been out too long, nerves fried by adrenaline. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I looked back one last time, the valley below was gone, where I expected to see the outline of the frozen camp. There was nothing. Just a flat, glassy surface, smooth as a lake, glimmering faintly under the dying light. I should have kept riding. I should have turned due west and followed the GPS line back to the main trail. But something about that perfect, shining expanse made me stop, because the surface was changing. I wiped the condensation from my visor, squinting. The glare from my headlight danced across it, and I realized what I was seeing weren't reflections. They were impressions, shadows beneath the ice. Faces. Dozens of them. Maybe more, trapped just below the surface, eyes, mouths twisted in silent screams. The same faces I'd seen back at the camp multiplied 100-fold. Some looked ancient, their features distorted, barely human. Others were fresh, and as I watched, the ice rippled, not cracked. Rip pled, like something beneath it was breathing. I backed up slowly, hand trembling as I reached for the ignition again. The sound of the engine felt impossibly small against that wide, cold silence. Then the snowmobile's headlight flickered once more, dimmed, and went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The only thing left was the sound, a faint, rhythmic creaking like ice expanding. And underneath it, something wet, a slow, deliberate knock. 1, 2, 3, coming from directly beneath the surface where those faces stared up. The knocks echoed through the ice like heartbeats, slow, patient, measured. They weren't random cracks from freezing expansion, they had intent. I killed my breath and listened. The sound repeated. 1, 2, 3. 3. A pause, then closer. The ground beneath my boots gave a soft shudder like something thick and alive had stirred beneath the crust. I wanted to tell myself it was water shifting beneath the frozen surface, some trapped air pocket letting go. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like movement. My snowmobile's headlight was dead, and I couldn't see beyond a few feet in the storm dark. I flipped up my visor. The air hit me like knives. Still, I needed to see. I reached into my pack, fumbled out my flashlight, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the mist, slicing a cone of weak yellow light across the frozen ground. The faces under the ice glimmered, still as before, but the ripples had spread outward. The surface was flexing, breathing almost, and the rhythm of the knocks matched my pulse in an awful synchronicity. Then I saw it. Near the center of the ice field, something was pushing upward from below. The surface bulged slightly, a slow dome rising under tension. For an instant, I thought it might be a trapped animal or some shifting ice shelf, but then the bulge elongated. It wasn't a bubble, it was a hand, a human hand, pressed from beneath the ice, palm flat, fingers splayed, nails scraping against the underside like a whisper of claws. I staggered backwards, slipping in the snow. The flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam dancing wildly over the frozen shapes. More hands appeared, 2, 4, 8, pushing from beneath, smearing pale shadows under the surface. They moved in unison, as though guided by the same buried will. I spun, ran for my sled. I didn't think, didn't breathe, didn't even feel my body moving. I threw myself over the seat, jammed the ignition cord, praying the engine would catch. It screamed to life on the second pull. The instant the headlights flared back on, I wished they hadn't. The faces under the ice were looking up. Not frozen. Not still. Their eyes were shifting, tracking the light, following me. One face, the closest, had lips that quivered under the frost. And in that distorted shimmer of refrozen air, I swore I saw the faintest motion, those lips forming words I couldn't hear. I hit the throttle. The machine lunged forward, tearing across the snow, spitting shards of ice behind me. I didn't look back until I was well past the ridge. When I finally did, the lights from the camp, or what remained of it, were gone. The valley behind me had been swallowed by the blizzard, all outlines erased. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it all. The storm howled in my ears, muffling even the sound of my own breath. But then, through the whiteout, I saw light again. A faint orange glow, too steady to be natural. It flickered against the fog in rhythmic pulses. Campfire light. Except I hadn't built any fire, and it wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead. I stopped. The machine idled beneath me, growling like something nervous. I turned off the engine. The silence that followed was almost holy. The glow came from a shallow basin below the next ridge, too regular in shape, too circular. I walked the sled forward a few yards, cautious, squinting through the snow. There were tents down there. The same arrangement, the same colors, the same torn edges and sagging poles. Even from this distance, I recognized it. It was the same camp. But this time it wasn't frozen. The fire burned hot and alive, wood crackling. Figures moved around it, silhouettes in heavy jackets, laughing, talking, one of them adjusting a lantern. Their voices reached me in bursts, muffled by distance and snow. Human. Normal. Living. For a second I almost shouted. Relief flooded through me so fast it made me dizzy. People. Real people. I wasn't losing my mind after all. I started down the slope, waving my arm, flashlight beam cutting the dark. "Hey!" I shouted. My voice sounded small. "Hey, you guys okay?" They didn't react. I tried again. Louder. Nothing. The wind howled between us, slowly tearing my words away. The figures kept moving around the fire, their shadows elongating on the snow. Then I noticed the timing, every gesture, every motion they were repeating. The one by the lantern reached out, adjusted it, then looped back to do it again. The two who had been laughing bent over at the same instant, straightened in perfect unison. The one seated at the fire reached for a stick, stirred the flames, replaced it. Then again. Then again. It was like watching a film reel stuck on a few frames. My gut turned cold. I lowered the flashlight, my breath fogging the air. The storm quieted for one disorienting heartbeat. In that stillness, I realized the sound of the fire hadn't changed. The crackle was wrong, flat, constant, looping like the motions of the people around it. I took one more step. The snow beneath me gave a low groan. When I raised my light again, the figures were gone. Only the tents remained, collapsed now, colorless under the wind. The fire had vanished too, leaving nothing but a pit of smooth, glassy ice in its place. At the edge of that pit was something small and unmistakable. My glove. I stared at it, blinking through disbelief. The same tear in the fabric, the same oil stain from my sled. But I was wearing both gloves. I raised my hands, 2 gloves right there, frostbitten and shaking. I looked back. The other ones still lay in the snow, perfectly still, half buried. That was when I heard the whisper. It didn't come from the pit or the trees or even the wind. It came from behind me. A voice, faint and papery, breathing words I couldn't understand. I turned, light trembling in my grip. Standing no more than 20 feet away was a shape, tall, coated in frost, a silhouette of a person, but not one of the frozen campers. This figure was different. It pulsed faintly, like the reflection of something alive trapped beneath ice. The voice came from its direction, the words spilling in fragmented syllables, not quite human. Then I understood one of them, my name. The voice rasped my name like it was remembering how to use a mouth. Each syllable cracked in the air, echoing between the ridges, carried by the wind until it dissolved into static. I stepped back, boots sinking deep into the powder. My flashlight caught the figure's face, or where a face should have been, and the light warped. The surface of it wasn't skin, not even ice. It was glassy, translucent, with something moving slowly behind it, like a frozen river barely holding back what wanted to surface. The figure tilted its head. The motion was painfully deliberate, as if its joints didn't fit quite right. Who are you?" I managed. The sound of my voice came out wrong, muffled, too loud at the same time. The thing didn't answer, but when it moved closer, the crunch of its steps wasn't heavy like boots on snow. It was thin, hollow, almost like the sound of breaking frost. I raised the flashlight higher. Beneath the ice shell exterior, something glimmered faintly, something alive. It was shaped like a human, but the details flickered. One moment it looked like a man in winter gear. The next, it looked like one of the frozen campers I'd seen in the valley. Its eyes were dark voids filled with reflected firelight that didn't exist anymore. I stepped back again. The snowmobile was behind me somewhere, just beyond my peripheral vision, but I didn't dare look away from the figure. Every instinct screamed that turning my back would end everything. The whisper came again, closer this time. You touched me. I felt the world tighten around that sentence. It was the kneeling camper, the one I'd brushed against near the fire pit. I knew it without question. The same pitch of voice I'd heard echo in my helmet when the ice cracked. "You shouldn't have," it said. And then, for the first time, I heard cracking that wasn't from the distance. It came from beneath my boots. I froze. A spiderweb of fractures spread across the surface of the snow, radiating out from where I stood. The sound was sharp, brittle, like something thin breaking under pressure. Then, a sudden weight shift. Beneath me, the ground sagged. The ice wasn't ground. It was a sheet, and I was standing on the edge of it. I lunged backward, snow spraying up around me as I scrambled toward the sled. Behind me, the figure's head tilted again, too far this time, its neck bending until I heard the wet pop of something unhinging. Then it moved. Not walked, slid, like a reflection peeling loose from its mirror. The shape glided forward over the ice, leaving no prints, no disturbance except the faint shimmer that trailed behind it like frost forming midair. I threw myself onto the snowmobile seat, slammed the ignition cord, and prayed. The engine sputtered, caught, died, then roared to life with a deafening growl. The figure's head snapped toward the sound. I gunned the throttle, and the sled shot forward, tearing through the storm. Snow ripped into my face. My goggles fogged instantly. Behind me, the whisper followed, not as a single voice, but as many, overlapping, tangled, repeating my name again and again until it became meaningless noise. The slope descended steeply now, too steep for safety, but I didn't care. I kept my thumb crushed against the throttle, speed building until the world blurred into a tunnel of white and motion. I don't know how long I rode like that, seconds, maybe minutes, before I saw something through the snow ahead, a dark line cutting across the white, a ridge. I yanked the handlebars hard, barely managing to swerve. The sled skidded sideways, half spinning before slamming to a stop in a spray of ice. My shoulder hit the ground. I slid several feet before coming to rest. The snow was thinner here, wind scoured to the bone. I lay there for a moment, panting, the engine idling behind me like a heartbeat. I turned to look back up the slope. The fog shifted, revealing movement. Dozens of shapes, faint and flickering, emerging one by one from the snowstorm. They didn't run or walk, they just appeared, fading in and out of visibility like something trying to remember how to exist. The frozen campers. The same gestures, the same faces, and at their center, the figure I'd touched. It was glowing faintly now, the ice on its body spidered with cracks that leaked dim blue light from within. It raised one arm slowly as though reaching for me again. The whisper carried on the wind. "Come back." I staggered to my feet and climbed back onto the sled. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped the throttle. "Come back," the voices echoed, overlapping, rising into something that was no longer speech. Then, just before I hit the gas, something else happened. The clouds above me parted. Not naturally, not slowly. They peeled open like film burning through a projector, revealing a wide circle of black sky. And in that circle hung the same orange glow I'd seen before. It wasn't a moon. It wasn't fire. It was the frozen camp, suspended upside down in the air. The same tents, the same fire pit, the same people mid-motion, but this time the fire was alive and the figures moved. Their laughter drifted faintly through the air, distorted, looping, like the echo of something that had already happened long ago. One of them turned toward me, still smiling. I realized with horror that it was me. I slammed the throttle. The engine screamed, and I tore forward into the storm until the light, the voices, the entire nightmare blurred into white. But the sound followed me for miles, the creak of shifting ice, and beneath it, the faint knock, 1, 2, 3, and the sound never left me. Even after I'd put 20, maybe 30 miles between myself and that valley, I could still hear it underneath the drone of the engine. 3 dull, deliberate knocks that rose and fell with my heartbeat. Sometimes I thought they were coming from the sled itself, from the treads or the pistons, but no. Each time I stopped, killed the motor, the sound followed anyway. It was beneath the ice. Beneath me. By then, I was running on instinct. I didn't trust my GPS. Its signal had begun to flicker, coordinates stuttering like a dying heartbeat. The compass needle spun lazily, pointing nowhere. The only thing I could rely on was the faint slope of the terrain, the sense of down and away. My head throbbed from the cold and the altitude. I didn't dare slow down. The storm had changed, too. It wasn't snowing anymore. It was falling, in sheets so thick they behaved like liquid. My faceplate iced over every 30 seconds. I had to keep wiping it clear with my glove just to see a few yards ahead. Each time I blinked, I thought I saw movement in the snowbanks, shapes forming and dissolving, faces pressing up through the drift, only to sink again. The world had become a tunnel of white noise, and I was a single heartbeat inside it. It must have been close to midnight when I spotted the first light, a narrow, amber glow barely visible through the curtain of snow. I throttled back instinctively, squinting through the fog. At first, I thought it was just another mirage, another trick of exhaustion. But it didn't move. It pulsed steadily. A cabin. My chest lurched. I hadn't seen a structure since I'd left the last supply route 2 days ago. I turned the sled toward it, half laughing through the ache in my jaw. My headlights swept over a small clearing, and the shape came into view. A ranger outpost, squat and half buried, one window lit from inside. I parked the snowmobile by the door, engine idling just long enough to remind me I wasn't dreaming. Then I cut the power. The silence hit like a blow. Only the wind remained. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale but warm. A small wood stove hissed in the corner, its iron belly glowing dull orange. Someone had been here recently. A tin cup still steamed faintly on the counter. "Hello?" My voice cracked, brittle from cold. No answer. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. The lock clicked like thunder in the silence. The interior looked functional. Maps pinned to the wall, a logbook on the desk, 2 cots folded against the far wall. Everything was too neat, too recently used. I approached the logbook, running a trembling finger down the last few entries. The most recent one read, open quote, January 22nd patrol scheduled for Outer Ridge. Weather worsening. Last sighting, campers at Cold Pass, 3 tents, advised relocation. No response. Close quote. My stomach dropped. Cold Pass. The coordinates matched the valley I'd found earlier. The handwriting was deliberate, steady. Beneath the note was an unfinished line, a pen drag that cut off mid-word as if whoever wrote it had been interrupted. I turned toward the stove, the warmth seeping into my gloves. That's when I saw it. Something small sitting beside the kettle. A glove. My glove. The one I'd seen in the snow. It lay there, palm up, perfectly dry, as if someone had set it down moments ago. I reached for it, hesitating mid-motion. My breath misted the air above it. The moment my finger brushed the leather, the room shuddered. Not violently, just enough that the cup on the counter rattled. The fire in the stove dimmed, colors bleeding into blue. The warmth drained out of the air so fast my breath froze mid-exhale. The light from the window flickered. Outside, the wind had stopped completely. The silence was so thick I could hear the faint creak of the building settling. Then, faintly, from beneath the floorboards, knock, knock, knock. I backed away. My legs hit the chair behind me, sending it toppling. The logbook slammed shut on its own, a puff of frost erupting from its pages. The stove lightened again, but the glow wasn't from fire anymore. It was cold, phosphorescent. The frost spread outward in veins, crawling up the walls, across the windowpane, over the floorboards. Each line of ice glowed faintly from within, like veins under translucent skin. The knocks came again, louder, faster. I grabbed my pack, stumbled for the door, yanked it open, and froze. The snow outside had gone still. The entire clearing shimmered like glass, reflecting the cabin's light back at me. The surface was smooth, unbroken, except for one thing: footprints. They led to the door, not away. I turned back toward the room and saw the window. There was a face on the other side of the glass. It wasn't pressed against it like someone peering in. It was within it, embedded halfway through the pane, mouth open mid-breath. The ice had formed around it, catching the expression in a perfect scream. Behind it, the faint silhouettes of others began to appear, dozens, maybe hundreds, taking shape within the frost, all facing inward. The knocking became pounding. The cabin shook. Frost began creeping across the inside of the walls now, up from the floor, down from the ceiling. My breath turned to mist. The air vibrated with a low hum, like the groan of a glacier about to split. I bolted. I tore through the clearing, leapt onto the snowmobile, hit the ignition, and slammed the throttle open. The sled roared to life, tearing away from the cabin as the window shattered behind me. A blinding white light erupted through the fog, swallowing the entire outpost. I didn't look back. The storm swallowed me whole. The horizon folded in on itself, direction and distance dissolving into noise. My limbs moved on memory alone. Ride, breathe, stay alive. When I finally dared to slow, the world was dark again. No wind, no snow, just endless stillness. I stopped, chest heaving, visor fogged. And then I saw it. Directly ahead of me, barely 20 yards away, was a circle of tents, half buried, half frozen. The same camp, exactly the same. And at its center, where the fire pit should have been, something glowed faintly under the ice. A single flicker of blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. I killed the engine. The knocking started again. 1, 2, 3. And this time it wasn't coming from below. It was coming from inside my helmet. The first knock rattled through the padding of my helmet like a pulse from my own skull. The second came harder, echoing behind my eyes. By the third, I realized it wasn't sound anymore. It was vibration running through the air, through me. My breath hitched. Frost began to creep across the inside of my visor, from my own exhale, from something else. The cold wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. I ripped the helmet off and threw it into the snow. The knocking stopped instantly. Silence fell, absolute. No wind, no breath, no motion. Just that impossible calm that follows when a storm hasn't really ended, only paused to listen. The glow at the center of the frozen camp pulsed again. Blue, faint, rhythmic. I could see now that it wasn't beneath the ice. It was inside something trapped there. A body, or what was left of one. I should have turned the snowmobile around and fled. But exhaustion, or curiosity, or whatever survival instinct had been corrupted by what I'd seen, pulled me toward that glow instead. I stepped off the sled and trudged forward through the powder, each crunch underfoot the only proof that the world was still real. The tents loomed again, sagging and crystalline, their seams encased in thick frost. As I passed one, I caught sight of movement inside. A person-shaped silhouette, sitting cross-legged, head bowed as though sleeping. I stopped. It was me. My same jacket, my same gloves, my same shape, motionless behind a thin sheet of milky ice. The detail was exact, even down to the rip in my right sleeve from earlier that day. I reached out without meaning to. My fingertips brushed the icy surface. It was warm. The moment I touched it, the figure's head snapped up. Its eyes opened, mine, but clouded over, filmed with frost. Its mouth moved, forming words that didn't reach me, though I knew what it was saying. Don't. The light from the pit pulsed faster. The ice around the tents began to vibrate, groaning like a glacier under strain. Thin cracks spiderwebbed outward, and from within the frost came shapes pressing to the surface. Hands, faces, indistinct forms that shouldn't have had strength to move. I stumbled back, nearly falling. The light intensified, now bright enough to paint the snow blue. The figures inside the ice began to hum, not with sound, but with the low vibration of frozen air breaking apart. And then, in one motion, the ice split. The ground gave way. The air rushed upward in a howl. I fell through a world of shattered frost and colorless light, landing hard on something slick and hollow. My flashlight, miraculously still strapped to my pack, swung wildly and revealed the space around me, a vast tunnel of translucent walls, as if the glacier itself was hollowed out from within. The ice wasn't clear. It was layered with motion, faces, limbs, entire scenes of people frozen mid-step, mid-breath, trapped in an eternal moment of panic. They weren't sculptures. They were real. And I realized then what had happened to the campers. They hadn't frozen in a storm. They hadn't died. They'd been taken, absorbed into the glacier as though time had folded them into a single instant and left them there to live forever in silence. The blue light came from deep below, a soft, throbbing radiance pulsing like the heart of something ancient and breathing. I could see it clearly now, refracted 1,000 times in the ice, a spherical core, veins of frost radiating outward, and there, faintly, something moved inside it. I crawled backward, my boots slipping on the smooth surface. But the tunnel shifted with me, its shape warping as though the ice itself was bending toward my motion. The hum deepened. The light brightened. Then I heard the whispers again. Dozens of voices this time, all speaking my name in unison. I turned, and the walls around me were filled with faces I recognized. The campers, the ranger, the people under the ice lake. They were all here, mouths open, eyes tracking my every move, and threaded among them, half-formed in the frost, was my own face, replicated over and over, each one a fraction more distorted, a fraction less me. The hum rose to a deafening pitch. The light inside the glacier pulsed once, twice, then stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was waiting. A final whisper slid through the stillness, close to my ear, though nothing stood near me. You saw us. Now stay. The ice beneath my hands softened, my fingers sank into it as though into thick syrup, and I felt something grip back, cold and slick, pulling me down. I struggled, clawed, screamed, but the sound was devoured by the stillness. The more I fought, the faster I sank. The frost climbed up my arms, over my chest, my throat, until even my breath came out as a cloud of ice. The last thing I saw before the light swallowed everything was a reflection on the inside of the ice. My own face, staring back, eyes wide, lips parted mid-breath. Then the world went white. I woke up to sunlight. I was lying in a bed, covered in wool blankets, the air thick with the smell of kerosene and coffee. A stove burned in the corner. I sat up, heart pounding. A ranger stood by the window, his back turned. He looked old, weathered, his parka faded to gray. When he turned, his eyes were pale blue and too calm. You're lucky, he said. Storm like that kills most people. Found you unconscious by the ridge this morning. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. The camp, I rasped. The people. He shook his head. That valley's been empty for 50 years. No one goes near it anymore. He handed me a cup of coffee. His hands were steady, but his fingertips were pale, almost translucent. I stopped. Through the window, the light hit something just right. For an instant, I thought I saw a reflection, not of the room, but of the valley, the tents, the fire, the frozen faces. And there, kneeling beside the pit, one figure looked up. Me. The ranger's eyes flicked toward me, then back to the window. Best not to touch what's been kept, he said quietly. The ice remembers. I blinked. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. Only snow glinting under the morning sun. But in the silence that followed, beneath the hiss of the stove, I could still hear it. Knock, knock, knock. It started with the kind of silence that only the mountains can hold, heavy, vast, and alive in its own way. I remember standing beside my old pickup, watching the thin smoke from the ranger station chimney drift up into the pink dawn sky. The station was nothing more than a cabin at the foot of an old fire tower, timber bones creaking from decades of storms, its steel frame rusted orange against the evergreens. The Park Service had asked for volunteers that summer. Wildfire season was coming early, and they needed someone willing to stay alone in the remote lookouts. Someone who didn't mind the quiet, or the kind of darkness that comes when there's no city for 100 miles in any direction. I said yes without hesitation. I thought I was ready for solitude. I thought I was prepared for anything. The radio crackled for the first time on my second night. I'd been staring out from the tower's glass enclosure, watching the last amber streaks of light die over the ridgelines when the static broke through. South Ridge, fire spreading fast. The voice was rough, distant, like it had traveled through more static than air. I pressed the button on the receiver and asked for a repeat, but there was nothing. just that low hiss again, the kind that makes you lean closer, hoping it will shape itself into something real. I wrote it off as a misfired transmission. Old radios pick up all kinds of things. The days followed a rhythm. I logged temperatures, wind speeds, visibility. The mornings smelled of pine and cold stone, and the nights were full of animal sounds that seemed to grow louder the longer I stayed. There's something about being alone that sharpens the senses. You start noticing how the air changes before the rain. You hear the sighs of trees as the wind presses through them. And you begin to understand that the woods aren't quiet at all. They just speak in a language most people never learn to hear. By the end of the first week, the radio had spoken twice more. Always the same tone, always the same urgency. Fire near Elk Run, can't see the ridge. I'd checked my maps. There was no Elk Run in my jurisdiction. I called dispatch, but they didn't have any active lookouts in that area, or any lookout tower by that name at all. The voice on the other end of the dispatch line was calm, polite, but distant. They told me interference was common. Sometimes radio signals bounce through the valleys, repeating fragments of older transmissions. Sometimes, they said, you're just hearing echoes. But what unsettled me wasn't the words themselves. It was the way the man on the radio sounded. His voice had weight, like he was standing right there, watching something burn. There was no mistaking the sound of fear in his breath. One evening, I climbed down from the tower to stretch my legs before sunset. The forest was painted in gold and long shadows, and every branch seemed to hum with its own pulse. I wandered toward the creek that ran along the ridge, the sound of the water steady and grounding. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, I heard it again, the faint crackle of a radio. But this time, it wasn't coming from my tower. It was drifting through the trees. I froze, straining to listen. Winds turning east, can't hold the line. It was that same voice, same rasp. I turned in a slow circle, my heart beating faster, scanning for a light or movement. Nothing. Just the still woods and the fading daylight. I hurried back to the tower, climbed the steps 2 at a time, and checked the radio. It was off, completely silent. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat by the window, the lantern dim beside me, and thought about what the old rangers used to say. Stories about the towers that had burned down decades ago, about the ones who never came back. Most people think those tales are just campfire talk, stories meant to scare the rookies. But sitting up there alone with the sound of the wind, I started to wonder. A week later, I found out something I wish I hadn't. I'd been organizing old reports in the storage shed behind the cabin when I came across a box labeled Lookout Records, 1968. Inside were weather logs, patrol notes, and a handful of black and white photos of towers that no longer existed. One caught my eye, a tower on a narrow ridge, half collapsed, its roof caved in from fire damage. The caption read, Elk Run Tower, destroyed by wildfire, June 1968. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Elk Run. That night, the radio came alive again, louder than before. It's moving fast, can't reach dispatch, winds at our backs. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. I grabbed the mic, my voice shaking as I asked for a location, a call sign, anything. The reply came after a long, empty pause. You're not watching your west line, you need to move. Then the static swallowed it whole. The west line. I turned and looked out through the glass. The horizon was dark and endless, the stars sharp and cold. But beneath them, on the farthest ridge, I saw it. A faint orange flicker. It was small at first, like the glow of a campfire. Then it flared, bright and sudden, and I realized it wasn't a campfire at all. I reported it immediately. Dispatch said they'd send a crew at first light. Until then, I was to monitor and stay put. But every hour I checked, that glow grew stronger, climbing higher into the night. I could feel the heat even from miles away, or maybe I just imagined it. The radio buzzed again around 3 a.m., the same voice, low and strained. You shouldn't have stayed. I froze. Who is this? I whispered. The voice came back, slower now, almost like a breath. We tried to warn you. And then, for the first time, I heard something else, faint in the background. The crackle of fire, the sound of timber splitting, the distant, helpless scream of someone who already knew how this was going to end. When the sun rose, the fire was gone. No smoke, no ash, no sign of anything burning. Dispatch confirmed there were no active wildfires within 100 miles. I stood there in the watchroom, my reflection pale in the glass, and felt something shift inside me. That kind of fear doesn't just fade, it settles in your bones. It makes you question what's real and what's left behind when a place remembers tragedy too well. But I stayed. Maybe I was stubborn. Maybe I wanted to understand. I told myself that what I'd heard was some old recording, a leftover signal bouncing through time. That's what I needed to believe. Yet deep down, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe those voices weren't coming from the past. Maybe they were coming from the places where the past never really ended. That next week, the radio went quiet. Too quiet. It's strange how you can grow used to fear until its absence feels wrong. The silence became its own kind of noise, heavy and expectant, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then on the 10th night, the signal returned, this time with clarity I'd never heard before. West line, 12 miles. The wind's shifting. I hesitated, staring at the map pinned to the wall. 12 miles west was nothing but old timber and dead brush, an area that hadn't burned in decades. I grabbed my binoculars, climbed to the catwalk, and scanned the horizon. And that's when I saw it, another tower. At first, I thought it was a trick of light, the silhouette of a tree line blending with the ridge. But it was there, plain as day, a steel structure, tall and skeletal, a faint glimmer of glass catching the sun. It stood exactly where Elk Run would have been. I blinked, wiped my eyes, looked again, still there. My hand tightened around the radio. "This is Tower 17 to Elk Run. I see your position. Do you copy?" The response came immediately. "Copy. You're late." My blood ran cold. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, the static roared back, drowning out every sound. The voice faded, replaced by something that didn't sound like a transmission at all. It sounded like wind howling through flame. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the tower was gone. I remember running down the tower stairs so fast I nearly slipped. The wooden steps groaned under my boots, the sound echoing through the empty clearing below. When I reached the ground, the air felt thicker, heavier, as if the forest itself had exhaled something it had been holding back. I walked out toward the tree line, eyes fixed on where that tower had stood just moments ago, but all I found were the ridges, still and endless, blanketed in pine. No steel frame, no glass glinting in the sun. Just the woods breathing slowly around me. I told myself it had to be a mirage. The heat, the glare, the hours alone, it could have twisted my perception. I'd read about that happening to people stationed too long in isolation. The mind starts filling in the spaces the world leaves blank. But that didn't explain the voice, the clarity, the feeling that whoever was on the other end of that transmission wasn't calling for help. They were warning me. That evening, I called dispatch again. The operator this time sounded young, maybe new. I gave her my ID and coordinates and asked if any fire lookout towers had been reactivated to the west. She checked, put me on hold, came back a minute later. "Negative," she said. "The last operational tower on that ridge was decommissioned in 1970, Elk Run, I think it was called. It burned down." Her words landed with an eerie finality. I thanked her, hung up, and sat back in the wooden chair by the radio, the static humming softly. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the glass windows of the lookout reflected my face, drawn, tired, pale from weeks of solitude. I thought of the voice saying, "You're late." Late for what? Late for seeing something I wasn't supposed to see? When the wind picked up that night, the tower swayed ever so slightly. The sound it made reminded me of breath through metal lungs. I tried to read to distract myself, but every creak, every crackle from the radio made me flinch. Around midnight, the static began again, faint at first, then stronger, like someone adjusting a dial on the other end. "Tower 17, the voice said. "Can you see it now?" I froze. My throat tightened. "See what?" There was a pause. Then the fire. I turned to the west-facing window, and for the second time I saw that orange bloom rise over the ridge. This time, it wasn't a flicker. It was a line of flame stretching across the horizon, moving fast, unstoppable. It looked real enough to paint the inside of the tower in amber light. I grabbed the binoculars again, my hands trembling. The flames moved like a living thing, devouring the trees, sending columns of smoke into the dark sky. "Dispatch, this is Tower 17, I said, my voice breaking as I pressed the radio button. "I'm seeing an active fire west of my position, 12 miles out. It's growing fast." No response. I repeated it. Twice. Nothing. Only the whispering hiss of the radio, followed by that same voice again, closer now, clearer than ever. "You can't stop it. None of us could." "Who are you?" I shouted. "Where are you transmitting from?" But deep down, I think I already knew. The air inside the tower grew hot, suffocating. I stepped outside onto the catwalk to get a better look, but as soon as I did, the smell hit me, smoke, sharp and acrid, cutting through the night. The wind pushed it hard against my face, and I could hear the faint popping of burning pine. It wasn't imagination this time. I could smell the fire, hear it. I ran back inside, grabbed my emergency pack, and called for evacuation protocol, but again, silence. Even the static had died. My heart pounded in my ears as I looked out once more, expecting to see the fire tearing down the ridge, but it was gone. Every trace of light, every ember, every whisper of smoke, gone. The forest stood dark and motionless again. The silence that followed was worse than the flames. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting for something, an explanation, another signal, maybe even dawn. But when the first hint of morning light bled through the clouds, the radio clicked back on. One final message, barely above a whisper. "It starts again today." That was all. I didn't understand what it meant at first. I thought maybe it was part of an old recording replaying itself. But when I stepped out onto the catwalk to take my morning readings, I saw the haze rising in the distance. Real this time. Dispatch confirmed it 30 minutes later. A lightning strike had sparked a fire west of the ridge, almost exactly where I'd seen the flames hours before. They were already mobilizing crews. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. That was the moment I stopped trying to reason with it. You can tell yourself all you want about logic, about science, about signals bouncing through time. But when the world around you starts predicting itself, when a voice warns you of things that haven't yet happened, something inside you breaks open. You start seeing the threads between past and present, between those who were lost and those who remain. I spent the next 2 days helping coordinate responses, relaying wind reports, watching smoke drift through the valleys. The fire grew, but we managed to contain it before it reached the old logging road. No lives were lost, no structures burned. When it was finally declared out, the relief didn't come. Only a deep, strange exhaustion. On my final night at the tower, I sat by the window again, looking out over the blackened ridges. The forest was quiet, almost reverent, as if mourning something only it understood. The radio was silent too, until just before dawn, when I heard that familiar crackle one last time. "Tower 17, the voice said softly. "You kept watch." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Who are you?" I asked again, not expecting an answer. The reply came, low and faint, someone who didn't. Then, just static. When the next ranger arrived to relieve me, I didn't mention the voice. I didn't mention Elk Run or the warnings. I handed him my reports, gave him the tour of the tower, and wished him luck. But before I left, I turned back once more to look at the horizon. The sun was rising over the western ridge, and for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, I thought I saw a glint of glass there, like sunlight reflecting off a distant window. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Even now, months later, when I close my eyes, I can still hear that voice in the static, the way it broke through the noise, calm and steady, as if it was still up there, watching, waiting, warning. I've learned that the forest doesn't forget. Neither does fire. Both have long memories, and sometimes they speak through the things we leave behind. And if you ever find yourself out there, alone in the watchtower, and you hear a voice on the radio that doesn't match any call sign, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off as interference. Because sometimes the echoes that find us aren't coming from the past at all. Sometimes they're coming from the ones who stayed too long, trying to make sure we don't make the same mistake they did, because in the deep silence of the wilderness, some warnings aren't sent to be answered. They're sent to be heard. When I came down from that mountain, it felt like stepping out of another lifetime. Civilization was loud, rushed, cluttered. I'd grown so used to the rhythm of the wind and the low hum of static that the noise of engines and voices felt foreign, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. I stayed in a small town at the base of the range for a few days, trying to settle my nerves, but I couldn't sleep. The dreams kept pulling me back to the tower. The scent of smoke, the hiss of the radio, the ghost of that voice saying, "You're late." It's strange how silence can haunt you even after you've left it behind. Every night I'd find myself sitting up in bed, listening to the faint hum of the motel refrigerator, pretending it was static. I missed it in a way that scared me. There was something comforting about that tower, even with everything that happened. Up there, life made sense. You had a purpose. Watch the line, listen for the call, report what you see. Down here, everything blurred together. Too many lights, too many distractions, too many ways to drown out what you didn't want to face. A few days later, I stopped by the ranger station to return my issued gear. The old man behind the counter, gray beard, heavy hands, recognized my call sign when I signed the forms. 17, he said, leaning forward. That's up near Cloud Ridge, right? I nodded. He stared at the form for a long moment before speaking again. You ever hear anything strange on the radio up there? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? He scratched the back of his neck, hesitating. Used to be, when I was a kid, my uncle ran that same tower. Said he'd pick up calls sometimes from the next ridge over. A tower that didn't exist anymore. His voice dropped lower. Elk Run, I think it was called. I didn't know what to say. He must have seen something in my face because he gave a slow, knowing nod. Yeah, he muttered. Most folks don't believe it. I wouldn't either if I hadn't heard that static myself once. Sounded like a man half lost in smoke. He signed my papers and handed them back. Some say the signal gets trapped in the air currents up there, bounces around like a voice in a canyon. But between you and me, he said quietly, some things aren't just echoes. Sometimes they're reminders. I left the station with a strange mix of fear and comfort. Someone else had heard it. I wasn't alone in this, but the thought of reminders stayed with me as I drove out of town, the mountains shrinking in my rearview mirror. I didn't know what they were trying to remind me of, only that I hadn't really left anything behind. Weeks passed. I tried to return to normal life. I took short jobs, spent time in coffee shops, avoided conversations about the wilderness. But every time I passed by a static hiss on the car radio, my stomach turned. One night, parked at a rest stop, I heard a burst of it through the speakers, loud and clear. And then, faintly, a voice. Tower 17. Winds changing. I slammed the dial off so hard my knuckles went white. I sat there for a long time in the dark, the headlights of passing trucks streaking across the windshield, my pulse hammering. It couldn't have been real. Maybe the signal was picking up an old transmission. Maybe I was just overtired. But that night, for the first time since leaving the mountains, I dreamed of the fire again. Only this time I wasn't watching from the tower. I was inside it as it burned. The walls glowed red. The radio screamed with static. And through it all, the same voice whispered, calm and certain, "It starts again today." I woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around me, my chest aching with the sound of my own breath. It was 3 a.m. The world outside the window was empty, just the endless hum of the highway. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to go back. I drove north the next day, the road winding higher into the mountains. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, as if the forest itself recognized me. When I reached the base of the ridge, I parked the truck and started the climb on foot. The trail was overgrown, and the silence returned like an old friend. It's funny how the things that scare us most can also be the things we crave, the places that feel like home even when they shouldn't. When I reached the clearing, the tower stood just as I'd left it, lean, weathered, unmoved by time. I climbed the steps slowly, each one groaning beneath me until I reached the watchroom. Dust coated the desk, and a layer of pine needles had blown in through the open vents. Everything was the same, except the radio. It was on. The power light glowed a dull amber, though I hadn't flipped a single switch. The static hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat. I stood there, frozen, staring at it, and then, through the noise, I heard it. "You came back," the voice. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" The pause that followed felt eternal. Then, quietly, "You know who I am." The sound of crackling wood filtered faintly through the background, like a memory being replayed. I stepped closer to the console, my reflection trembling in the glass. "Why me?" I asked. The static swelled, then thinned into words, heavy and deliberate. "Because you listened." And then the line went dead. Outside, the forest was completely still. No wind, no wind, no birds, and even the rustle of leaves. The kind of stillness that makes you realize you're standing inside something vast and aware. I stayed there, waiting for another transmission, but it never came. Only the low hum remained. That was the moment I finally understood. The voice wasn't warning me anymore. It wasn't trapped. It was waiting for someone to remember, to bear witness. The Elk Run lookout hadn't burned in vain. It had left behind a signal, a story woven into the air itself, calling out to anyone who'd listen. And I had. Before I left, I picked up the microphone and spoke softly into it, the way I would to an old friend. Message received. The static quieted for a moment, almost like it was breathing with me. Then, faintly, a single word came back. Good. When I descended the tower for the last time, dawn was breaking through the trees, painting the forest in light. The air smelled clean, fresh pine, wet earth, the kind of stillness that feels almost sacred. I knew I'd never hear that voice again, but I also knew it didn't need to speak anymore. The message was clear. Some warnings aren't about fear. They're about remembrance. About learning how to see the fire before it comes. And as I drove away from that mountain for the final time, I realized that maybe we all have our own Elk Run. Something burned down long ago, still sending out its quiet signals through the noise of our lives, waiting for us to listen. Because sometimes the things that haunt us are just the echoes of what once tried to protect us. And if you're ever out there in some lonely corner of the woods and the radio hums when it shouldn't, don't turn it off. Let it speak. Because you never know when a warning from the past might be the thing that saves you from the fire still to come. I didn't go home right away. Something in me couldn't, not yet. Instead, I drove until the mountains faded into rolling plains, until the sky felt too big and the horizon too far. I stopped at a gas station off Highway 83, one of those forgotten places with a single pump, a soda machine that hadn't worked in years, and a man behind the counter who looked like he'd seen every kind of traveler. He asked if I'd come from the north. I nodded. He said he could tell by the smell of smoke in my clothes. That caught me off guard. I hadn't been near a fire for weeks, but when I looked down at my jacket, I realized he was right. The faint scent of pine ash still clung to it, as if the forest itself refused to let me go. I bought a coffee and sat on the hood of my truck, staring out across the empty road. The world looked different somehow, too bright, too loud. There's something about being out there in the wilderness that strips away everything you pretend to be. The tower had done that to me. Alone for so long, every thought echoes until you start hearing your own soul talk back. You begin to see what you've been ignoring, your fears, your regrets, your need for purpose. And when something speaks to you through that static, something that feels older than language, you don't just hear it, you feel it. I thought about that voice and how calm it had been in the face of something so final. There was a dignity to it, an acceptance. He wasn't trying to be saved. He was trying to make sure no one else suffered the same way. That kind of selflessness stays with you. It's not fear that lingers, it's responsibility. I spent that night camped behind the gas station, my truck backed against the trees. I built a small fire, just enough to warm the air, and sat watching the flames. Fire's strange that way. It destroys, but it also reveals. It burns away what's dead so that something else can live. It's easy to forget that when you only see the damage. Maybe that's what the message had really been about all along, not just warning, but renewal. A cycle that doesn't end, only begins again. When the wind shifted, the smoke from the campfire curled toward the woods behind me. In that moment, I thought I heard something, faint, familiar. The hiss of static. It wasn't from a radio this time. It came from the forest itself, carried through the branches like a whisper. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. I just listened. For a few seconds, the sound faded in and out, like a distant signal fighting through interference. And then it stopped. Total silence. The kind of silence that presses down until you feel it in your bones. I don't know how long I sat there. Time moves differently when you're listening for something you can't explain. Eventually, I laid back in the truck bed and watched the stars blur overhead. They reminded me of the tower windows on clear nights, how the world below disappeared, leaving only that weightless feeling that you were standing between heaven and fire. I fell asleep with the radio on my dashboard. I'd brought it with me when I left the tower, even though it didn't work anymore. Maybe I kept it as proof that what I'd heard was real. Maybe I just couldn't let it go. Either way, around dawn, it crackled once. Just once. No words. Just that steady hum, the sound that had filled every night I'd spent on the ridge. When I woke, the sun was rising, the fire long cold, the radio was silent again. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the scratches along the casing, the dents from years of use. It was old, but still alive in its own way. I realized then that I'd been wrong to think the signal was only about the past. It wasn't. It was about memory. The kind that never dies, only transfers. The kind that finds you wherever you go. I drove for hours that day with the radio on the passenger seat. Every time the static whispered, I felt that familiar pull, the reminder that somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, beyond what we can explain, there's a voice still watching the ridges, still keeping watch for us, still trying to make sure we don't make the same mistake. Weeks later, I got a letter from the Forest Service. They were restoring some of the old towers, modernizing the equipment. My hands trembled as I read it. Tower 17 was among them. They asked if I'd be willing to return for training, to show the new volunteers how to operate the fire lookouts, how to handle isolation, how to listen for what matters. I read the letter 3 times, and though every part of me should have said no, I found myself smiling, because the truth was, I already knew I would go back. Not to chase what I'd heard, but to honor it, to make sure no one else ever stood there alone, unaware of what those voices had tried to protect. I returned that summer. The forest had healed in places, black scars now softened by green. When I reached the tower, I paused at the base, running my hand along the weathered steel. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt steady, like it had found peace. Inside, the air was cool. The new radio was sleek, digital, humming softly. I set my old one beside it, its cracked casing dull under the morning light. For a moment, I thought I heard the faintest trace of static, a sound so quiet it might have been the wind. I leaned forward and whispered, "Still here." And for a heartbeat, I swear the light on the old radio flickered, just once, like a nod. That night, when the stars came out and the valley disappeared beneath the mist, I sat in that same chair, watching the ridges. No voices came through, no warnings. Just the endless hum of life in the forest, the kind that exists between the living and the lost. And in that quiet, I realized something simple yet profound. Some stories don't end in fear or tragedy. Some end in gratitude. Because maybe what the voice on the radio had really wanted was not to be remembered as a ghost, but as a guardian. Maybe all those transmissions were just one final act of service, from one lookout to another, passed down through the static and silence, from tower to tower, from past to present. And maybe that's what all of us are doing in our own way, sending out signals into the unknown, hoping that someone, somewhere, is listening. So if you ever find yourself standing alone in the wilderness, where the air is too still and the world feels ancient, listen closely. Beneath the rustle of trees, the hum of wind, the faint rhythm of your heartbeat, you might just hear it too. That soft crackle of static. That quiet voice in the dark, still keeping watch, still warning, still waiting to be heard. We had camped in that forest before. Same trailhead, same clearing, same way the light hit the river in the mornings like a silver thread cutting through the dark pines. It wasn't supposed to feel unfamiliar, but that was the first sign, how even the familiar can turn strange when you start paying attention. The drive had been long, nearly 6 hours of dirt road and switchbacks until the asphalt disappeared and all that remained was mud and pine needles sticking to the tires. I remember how the truck's headlights caught the fog that evening, turning the air milky. When we finally parked, we didn't speak for a while, just listened. The forest was breathing, slow and deep, the way old places do. There were 3 of us. I'll call them Morgan and Luke. We'd gone camping every spring since college, picking a different national forest each year. It wasn't about adventure anymore. We just wanted silence, the kind that hums in your bones. Morgan set up the tent near the edge of the clearing, beside a tree that looked like it had been split in half by lightning. I unloaded the cooler, the chairs, the little fire pit we carried everywhere. The evenings smelled of wet bark and cedar. Luke wandered off toward the river to fill the filter bag, his flashlight bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp between the trunks. I should have paid attention to how quickly the light faded that night. By the time Luke came back, the trees had gone black against a darker sky. We made a fire, cooked sausages, opened cheap beer, talked about work, about how much harder it was getting to make time for this. The flames cracked and spat sparks, and for a while it was just laughter echoing through the dark. Then the woods went quiet. Not a breeze, not an insect, just silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Morgan stopped mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" I did, or maybe I heard the absence of everything else. We waited, listening. Somewhere deeper in the woods came a sound like bark being peeled off a trunk, slow, deliberate. Then another, closer this time. Luke aimed his flashlight in that direction, but the beam hit nothing, just trees. "Probably elk," he said, too fast. "But elk don't strip bark." We stayed up later than usual, keeping the fire going, making jokes we didn't laugh at. Eventually, fatigue won. The 3 of us crawled into the tent. The forest was so still I could hear the blood in my ears. Sometime during the night, I woke to a strange smell, wet soil, but metallic. I thought maybe Morgan was moving outside, but when I looked over, both she and Luke were asleep. I listened. There it was again, a soft, steady scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged just beyond the tent. Then the wind came back. It rushed through the branches all at once, a sudden sigh of air that made the tent walls shudder. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. The sun broke through the mist, and the world looked normal again. Morgan brewed coffee. Luke joked about my nightmares. We packed our day packs, planning to hike to a ridge we'd seen on the map, a good 4 miles out. Before leaving, I took a picture of the truck, just a habit I'd picked up over the years. A way to mark where we'd started. We followed the river upstream. The forest here was dense, but manageable. Ferns brushed our shins. Moss hung from the branches like old lace. It was peaceful again. Every so often, the wind carried that same metallic tang, but none of us mentioned it. We reached the ridge by noon. The view stretched out forever, endless green, no roads, no houses, nothing but forest as far as we could see. We took photos, ate sandwiches, watched a hawk spiral overhead. When we decided to head back, clouds were already forming. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of rain. We reached camp as the sky cracked open. The rain came hard, slamming the tent walls, turning the ground to soup. For an hour, we stayed huddled inside, listening to thunder roll through the valley. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The air afterward was unnaturally fresh, almost sweet. I stepped outside to check the fire pit, and that's when I noticed something strange. The clearing seemed smaller. The trees felt closer than before. The space where we'd parked the truck looked tighter, narrower. I brushed it off as a trick of light, the storm, the fog, the way shadows bent, but something about the forest line had changed. We ate dinner quietly that night, no jokes, no stories. The silence returned with the darkness. I woke up again around midnight. Same smell, same dragging sound, but this time I heard something else, a faint creaking, like wood bending under pressure. I held my breath and waited. The sound moved around the tent, circling. Then a soft thud, as if something heavy had dropped into the wet ground nearby. I whispered, "Morgan?" No answer. The creaking stopped. I counted the seconds, every muscle frozen until sleep finally dragged me under. At dawn, I crawled out of the tent. The air was still, damp. The fire pit was half buried under new leaves that hadn't been there yesterday. The truck glistened with rain, but something about it looked off. The windshield had streaks of mud on it, like fingers had run across it in the night. Luke came out next, rubbing his eyes. "Weird dream," he mumbled. "I thought I heard." He stopped when he saw the truck. We both stood there, staring. There were boot prints, at least they looked like boots, circling the vehicle, when half washed away by the storm. But they weren't ours. We hadn't been wearing anything that big. The prints led off into the trees where the fog was rising again. Morgan stepped out, coffee mug in hand. "What's wrong?" Neither of us answered. We just looked at those prints disappearing into the mist and realized how quiet the morning had become again. Even the river sounded distant, like it had moved. We followed the tracks without saying a word. They were clear enough at first, large, deeply pressed, as though whoever made them had been carrying something heavy. They curved around our campsite once, then cut straight into the woods. After 50 feet or so, they just stopped. Not faded or washed out. Stopped. As if the thing that made them had simply vanished into the air. "Could have been runoff," Luke muttered, crouching to touch the ground. Maybe the rest got flooded out. But the soil was dry now. No puddles, no marks of erosion. I looked around. The forest seemed wrong. The trees were thicker here, the bark darker, twisted in ways that didn't match the ones near camp. I could have sworn there had been a dead log lying near the trail yesterday, an easy landmark. But it was gone now, swallowed by new growth. When we walked back toward the clearing, something else hit me. The path wasn't where it should have been. "Wait," I said. "This isn't right." The others turned. We followed the riverbank to camp. It should be just past that rise, but... The rise was there, but beyond it lay more trees. Thick ones. Young too, their trunks slim, their bark pale. Saplings that looked like they'd grown for maybe 5-6 years. But this was our path. We had walked through here less than 24 hours ago. Morgan frowned, stepping closer. These weren't here yesterday. Luke forced a laugh, the kind that sounds like someone trying to shake off fear. "Come on, trees don't just grow overnight." But I could see it on his face. The unease had set in. Back at the truck, the air felt different again, heavier, dense with humidity. The sunlight that filtered through the canopy looked greener than it should have, tinted as if the leaves were bending it. Morgan pulled out her phone. "Let's check GPS. Maybe we just got turned around." We waited while it searched for a signal. The spinning circle on the screen felt like it was mocking us. Then it locked, and the three of us just stared. We weren't anywhere. The map showed a massive green blob, unlabeled, uncharted. No roads, no contour lines, no landmarks. Just forest. Our blue dot blinked dead in the middle of it. Morgan zoomed out, her hand trembling slightly. The more she zoomed, the more wrong it got. The nearest highway, gone. The name of the forest, gone. It was as if someone had redrawn the entire landscape overnight and erased us from it. "This is impossible," she whispered. Luke rubbed his temples. "It's a glitch. It has to be." But then we noticed something else. The air smelled different again, sharp, sweet, like wet wood and rot. It clung to the back of the throat. I turned toward the trees. They seemed to have shifted closer again. I could swear I hadn't parked that close to the edge before. Morgan's voice was shaking now. Let's just drive out. GPS or not, we know the direction we came from. I nodded. We packed up quickly. The forest watched us. I could feel it. An awareness, subtle and patient, like something waiting for us to make the next move. When we climbed into the truck, I started the engine. The sound broke the silence like a scream. Birds took off somewhere deep in the canopy. I threw it into reverse and back toward what should have been the road. But there was no road, just trees, thick ones, stretching as far as the headlights could reach. Morgan leaned forward, squinting. It was right there. I remember that fallen tree, except it wasn't fallen anymore. The trunk stood upright now, tall and unbroken, branches stretching into the mist. Luke's voice cracked. Okay, we need to stay calm. Maybe we drove in a different way yesterday. Let's circle around, find the bank of the river. I wanted to believe him, but every direction looked the same. We drove for maybe half an hour, the truck bumping over roots and half-rotted debris until the GPS dot started spinning again, directionless. Then the road appeared. A narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees, just wide enough for the truck. I didn't care where it led. I turned onto it immediately. We drove for another 20 minutes, then 40. The forest grew thicker on both sides. The air grew darker. Eventually, I realized I was pressing the gas harder, like trying to outrun something I couldn't name. The odometer said we'd gone nearly 10 miles. Then we came to the same clearing. Our clearing. The fire pit. The tent. Even the footprint I'd left beside the cooler. We hadn't gone anywhere. Luke laughed then, too loud, too forced. No, that's not possible. Morgan started crying. We didn't turn around. We didn't. I killed the engine. The silence swallowed the noise again. The forest looked thicker now, darker, like it was closing in. That metallic smell was back. When I stepped out of the truck, I heard it again, the dragging sound, faint, somewhere to the north, something moving through the undergrowth with weight, with purpose. I looked down and saw the same footprints again, new ones, leading out of the forest right toward us. And this time, there were 4 sets. We froze. 4 sets of prints. Not 3. And none of them led away. They stopped a few feet from the truck, facing us. The mud around them was dark, freshly pressed. Whatever made them had been here minutes ago. Morgan whispered, "Who else would be out here?" Her voice felt small against the forest's silence. Luke crouched beside one of the prints, tracing the edge with his finger. They're too big, too deep. He tried to measure with his boot. His size 11 barely covered half. That's not right. The longer I looked, the worse it got. The heel marks were wide, flat, almost rounded, like someone had dragged their feet through the soil instead of lifting them. But the front half, what should have been toes, was long, arched, and split as though 2 large digits had gouged into the earth. I took a step back. We need to go inside, now. We piled into the truck again, doors slamming like gunshots. The forest flinched, or maybe that's just what it felt like. I locked the doors, even though we were miles from anyone or anything human. Morgan had her phone in her lap, staring at the screen. Still no signal. The green light from the GPS blinked faintly, then flickered out completely. The world outside the windshield shifted as the fog thickened, wrapping around the trees like it was growing from them. Every trunk looked identical. Every direction felt wrong. Then, out of nowhere, a sound cracked through the fog, something between a creak and a low moan, as if wood itself was breathing. Luke gripped the dash. That's a tree. Has to be. I wanted to believe that. But trees don't move in rhythm. They don't groan in sequence, one after another, as if something was walking between them. The sound passed from left to right, heavy and deliberate. Each step or shift sent a vibration through the truck. Morgan covered her mouth. Please, just go. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. Battery's fine, I said, my voice hollow. It's like something's grounding it out. Luke grabbed his flashlight. We're not staying here. I tried to stop him, but he was already out the door, scanning the tree line. The beam hit trunks, mist, and nothing else. The air shimmered with moisture and that same metallic tang. See? he called, forcing a laugh. Nothing. It's just the... He stopped. His light caught movement. Not fast, slow, almost graceful, a shape shifting between trees. Luke, I said quietly, get back in the truck. He aimed the light higher. For a second, I thought it was another trunk, wide and pale. Then it moved. It bent. The outline was all wrong. I saw something like shoulders, but too narrow, and a head that tapered upward into the branches. No face, just the suggestion of one, pressed into bark. Luke stumbled back. What the hell? It moved again, faster this time, slipping behind another tree. The sound of wood bending followed it. He ran for the truck, slammed the door, and locked it. His breath came out in ragged gasps. I saw it, he said. It was standing there, watching. Morgan was shaking. You saw a tree, Luke. A shadow. He turned on her, eyes wide. It moved. We sat there, trapped between disbelief and terror, until the fog began to thin. The light shifted, faintly orange, the sun setting. It was only then that I realized we'd been sitting there for hours. The clearing looked different again. The fire pit? Gone. The tent? Gone. The cooler? Half buried in leaves that hadn't been there this morning. Everything looked older, overgrown, as if months had passed. Morgan started crying quietly. We can't stay here. She was right. We grabbed what we could, flashlights, packs, water, and started walking. We left the truck behind. I marked the trees with my knife as we went, and little slashes at eye level. Something about it felt like control, even though I knew deep down it wasn't. We followed where the river should have been, but the air was dry. The sound of rushing water was gone. Every few steps I glanced behind, making sure the path was still there. After maybe half an hour, we found something that made my stomach turn. One of my knife marks, clean fresh, on a tree ahead of us. But it was the same pattern I'd carved earlier, near the truck. We had walked in a perfect circle. Luke kicked a rock. That's not possible. We were heading straight. Morgan shook her head. The compass is useless. Look, it's spinning. The needle twisted aimlessly, north changing directions with each movement. We decided to camp right there. The fog was too thick to go further. Luke set up a small fire, hands trembling so bad he could barely light it. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Every crack, every gust of wind made me flinch. At some point, Morgan started humming under her breath, some half-forgotten tune, off-key and nervous. Then we heard it. Something humming back, the same tune, from the trees. We froze. The fire popped once, sending sparks into the air. The humming stopped, replaced by a faint scraping sound, moving closer. Luke raised his flashlight, but the beam only caught mist. Then, briefly, a figure, tall, still, blended into the bark, its head tilted at an angle too sharp to be human. The humming came again, but not from its mouth, from the forest itself. Morgan whispered, "We shouldn't have come back." And for the first time, I knew she was right. The forest around us wasn't the same one we'd camped in. It was something else, pretending to be. I don't know if any of us slept that night. The fire burned low, hissing whenever a drop of mist touched it, and we sat in a tight circle around it. 3 small figures swallowed by the dark. Every few minutes, I caught myself staring at the trees, counting them, tracing their shapes against the fog to make sure they weren't moving. Sometimes I thought I saw one leaning closer, branches curling slightly inward. But then I'd blink, and it would stand straight again. Around midnight, the humming started once more. This time it was faint, like wind slipping through hollow wood, but it wasn't wind. The tone carried structure, deliberate intervals, like something remembering how to mimic a tune. Morgan pressed her hands against her ears. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" Luke whispered, "Don't respond. Whatever it is, it listens." We sat in silence, hearts pounding until the sound faded into the distance. Then, nothing. No birds. No insects. No night sounds at all. Sometime later, minutes, hours, I couldn't tell, I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps, slow, wet, coming from the direction we'd walked earlier. Luke grabbed the hatchet. "If it's an animal..." "It's not," I said. I knew it in my bones. The sound grew louder until it was just beyond the circle of light. I aimed my flashlight into the dark and froze. There was a figure standing just outside the fire's reach. It was shaped like a person, but wrong in every detail. The limbs were too long, the joints slightly off. The head, if you could call it that, was narrow and bark-colored, its surface ridged and cracked like old wood. Its skin, or bark, gleamed wetly under the light. When it moved, it didn't walk. It unfolded. The motion of branches untangling from a canopy. Morgan whimpered, "Oh my God." The thing tilted its head, and I heard the faint crack of splitting wood. Then it took a step forward. Luke swung the hatchet back, shouting, the blade slicing air. The thing didn't flinch. It simply stepped back, blending into the shadows until it looked like part of a tree again. And then it was gone. Just gone. We didn't speak after that. We huddled close to the fire until dawn bled into the sky, a pale gray light that made the forest seem flatter, smaller, less alive, but no less wrong. When we finally stood, every part of me ached. My legs felt heavy, like walking through water. Morgan pointed behind the campfire. Look. In the dirt was a circle of footprints, the same wide, split tracks as before. They surrounded us completely, just inches from where we'd slept. They hadn't broken a single twig. Luke stared at them for a long time, then at the trees. They were watching us all night. He didn't say who they were. He didn't have to. We packed in silence. No one said the word leave, but we all knew it was time. We picked a direction, east, toward what we hoped was the rising sun, and started walking. After an hour, the terrain began to slope downward. My hope sparked when I saw a faint shimmer of light through the trees. A river. But as we got closer, something was off. The air was thick and cold. The light on the water wasn't reflection. It was movement, like the surface was pulsing slowly, breathing. The river didn't flow. It just quivered. When I knelt beside it, I realized it wasn't water. The surface was viscous, gelatinous, clear but dense like sap. Beneath it, something shifted, slow currents of darker color twisting beneath the surface. Morgan's hand clamped on my shoulder. "Don't touch it." I looked up at her, then at the far bank. The opposite shore was lined with roots so massive they looked like veins. They stretched across the water, dipping into the strange surface as though drinking. Luke pointed upstream. "There's a crossing. Let's go." The crossing turned out to be a series of fallen trunks spanning the river. I hesitated, testing one with my boot. It held. The wood felt alive beneath me, warm. We crossed one by one, slow and careful. Halfway across, the forest grew quiet again. I looked down and saw something rise beneath the surface, humanoid but translucent, drifting upward like a shadow in syrup. It had no face, just the faint suggestion of eyes. Then it pressed upward, touching the underside of the log. The entire trunk vibrated. "Move," I shouted. We ran. Luke slipped, his boot plunging into the liquid. He screamed, kicking free, the stuff clinging to him like spider silk. I grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. When we reached the other side, he collapsed, panting. The goo still clung to his boot, darkening the leather. Morgan ripped it off his foot, tossing it aside. The fabric smoked slightly. Luke stared in shock. It burned through. The hole in the boot was small but clean, edges smooth, almost melted. The stuff sank into the soil, vanishing. We moved on faster now. The trees were changing again, trunks wider, roots twisting like muscles beneath the ground. The canopy above us thickened until the light barely reached the forest floor. After another hour, we saw movement ahead. A clearing. Relief flooded through me until we stepped inside. It wasn't a clearing. It was our campground. Same burned circle of stone, same broken chair. But everything was older. The cooler was collapsed under a carpet of moss. The tent had rotted into a dark pile of fabric. It looked like it had been here for years. Luke dropped to his knees, his voice breaking. "This can't be real." I looked at the ground. Our old footprints, fossilized in dried mud, half covered by new roots. The forest hadn't just changed around us, it had grown through us. Morgan turned slowly, staring at something behind me. Her voice came out a whisper. "They're here again." I turned. Between the trees, shapes were gathering. Dozens of them, some tall, some crooked, some crawling on hands that looked like roots. Their bark flesh shifted in the dim light. And from within the wood came faint whispers, human voices tangled together, murmuring words I couldn't understand. The forest wasn't growing. It was waking. They surrounded us slowly, as if the idea of rushing didn't exist in their world. Every step they took made the forest creak and breathe, branches whispering above like lungs exhaling through a canopy. I couldn't tell if they were individuals or parts of one massive body, roots and limbs threading between them, the same pulsing rhythm moving beneath their bark. Some of them still had remnants of human shapes. A shoulder, a jawline, a hint of a hand that hadn't yet hardened into wood. Morgan's voice cracked. Are those people? Luke's answer was a tremor. No, they can't be. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. The way they moved wasn't alien. It was familiar, hesitant, tired, almost human. They were what the forest made when it kept something too long. One of them stepped closer. Its face was half hidden behind layers of bark, but the eye sockets were hollow, dark, and deep. Its hand rose slowly, while cracking as it bent. I realized it wasn't reaching for me. It was pointing at the ground. There, beneath a thin film of moss, was something buried, the faint curve of metal. I knelt despite the others' protests, brushing the dirt away until a shape emerged. It was the hood of our truck, half consumed by roots. I stumbled back, choking on disbelief. That's impossible. We left it hours ago. The forest groaned. The sound came from everywhere at once. Not like thunder, but like the earth itself was stretching. Luke turned in circles, panic breaking through. We've been walking in circles. This place, it's folding in on itself. The ground beneath us shifted, subtle but steady. Roots pulsed like veins, and the figures began to move again, their motions synchronized, bending toward the truck like mourners at a grave. Morgan grabbed my arm. We have to run. We did. Branches lashed at our faces as we tore through the woods. No sense of direction, just motion. The air was thick with that metallic sweetness like blood and sap. Every breath burned. The trees blurred together, their trunks merging and splitting as if alive. Behind us came the sounds, the creaking, the dragging, the low murmur of something too ancient to name. We didn't stop until we stumbled into a clearing. Smaller this time, the trees forming a tight ring around it. The ground here was soft, spongy. I pressed my hand into it and pulled away to find it slick with moisture. Beneath the top layer of soil were thin white roots, thousands of them pulsing faintly. Do you hear that? Morgan whispered. I did. A low thrum, deep beneath the earth, rhythmic, steady, a heartbeat. The entire forest was alive, not metaphorically, literally alive and aware. Luke looked around wildly. There has to be a way out. There has to be. He pulled out his compass again, but it wasn't spinning anymore. It was pointing straight down. Before any of us could process that, the ground shuddered. Roots snapped through the soil like breaking bones, whipping through the air. One caught Luke's leg, dragging him off his feet. He screamed, hacking at it with his hatchet. The wood split open and bled. I saw it clearly. Thick, dark fluid like sap mixed with blood, pulsing from the wound. The root recoiled, retreating back into the ground. The forest screamed. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, not wind, not animal, something older. The canopy shivered, leaves fluttering in waves like a single organism in pain. Morgan fell to her knees, covering her ears. It's angry! It's angry at us! I grabbed her hand and pulled her up. Run! We tore through the trees again. The light dimmed until it was almost night, though my watch said noon. I kept expecting to break through to something. A trail, a hill, any sign of the outside world, but every path only led deeper. Then I saw it. A cabin, just ahead, half hidden by vines and moss. Its roof sagged and one of the windows was shattered, but it was human. Built. A structure that didn't belong to the forest. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. Inside, everything was thick with dust. Old furniture, a wood stove, a table covered in mold, and on the far wall, scratched into the wood, a message. Don't cut the trees. Morgan's breath hitched. It warned us. Luke dropped the hatchet. His hands were trembling so badly it clattered on the floor. I didn't know. Something slammed into the side of the cabin. The walls shuddered. Another impact, stronger. Dust fell from the ceiling. I peered through the cracked window. Shapes moved outside. Dozens of them. The forest pressed close, bark shifting like muscle. Then something began to crawl under the door. Not a branch, a root. Thin, white, and moving like a worm. It snaked toward Luke's dropped hatchet, curling around the handle. Before I could react, it pulled the weapon under the door. We heard the metal scrape against the porch, then silence. Luke backed away, whispering prayers. Morgan was crying quietly, staring at the wall. That's when I noticed the other carvings. Beneath the message, scratched deeper, almost frantic. If you see the cabin again, you never left. I looked around, dread tightening in my chest. The furniture wasn't just old, it was familiar. The layout, the chair near the window, the dent in the table where we dropped a lantern years ago during another camping trip in this same forest. It was the same cabin, only now it was buried in the forest that had grown over it. The air thickened, the walls began to creak. A crack split across the ceiling, sap dripping through it. Morgan whispered, "It's not just growing around us, it's growing through us." The wood beneath our feet pulsed once, in perfect rhythm with that deep heartbeat underground. Outside, the forest began to hum again, not like before. This time it was louder, synchronized, rising in pitch until the windows trembled, and through that awful harmony, something called my name. Slowly, clearly. The voice came from the trees. It said my name like it had always known it. The sound came from everywhere at once, through the wood of the cabin walls, through the air, through the ground itself. It wasn't just a voice, it was vibration, as if the syllables were being grown rather than spoken. Morgan gripped my sleeve, her nails digging into my arm. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "Don't let it know you're listening." But it already knew. The roots under the floorboards began to move, pushing up through the cracks, curling around our boots like fingers. I kicked one away and watched the wood splinter. Sap spattered across my jeans, and when it touched my skin, it burned cold, not hot, the way frostbite does. Luke stumbled backward toward the stove. "We can burn it," he said hoarsely. "Fire still works." He tore open his pack, dumped out a can of lighter fluid, and splashed it across the floor. The smell filled the cabin, harsh, human, desperate. I pulled a match from my pocket, but before I could strike it, the humming outside shifted pitch. It deepened, slowed. The trees were listening. "Do it," Morgan screamed. I struck the match. For a moment, the light felt holy. It caught the fluid with a whoosh, and flames spread across the boards, devouring the roots. The cabin glowed orange. The humming faltered, replaced by something that sounded like 1,000 low moans. Luke laughed, a cracked, wild sound. "We did it!" Then the floor gave way. The fire had weakened the boards, and below them wasn't dirt. It was something else, a hollow full of roots, all pulsing, all alive. The ground caved inward, sucking us down into a tangle of wood and darkness. I hit something soft. The air was damp, choking. My flashlight rolled away, flickering weakly. Morgan and Luke fell beside me, coughing, tangled in the lattice of roots that flexed and shifted around us like muscle. We were in a cavity, a vast chamber beneath the forest. The walls glowed faintly, green veins of bioluminescence winding through the wood. Every inch of it moved with slow, breathing rhythm. And at the center of the chamber was it. A trunk wider than a house, its surface split open like a wound. Inside, I saw what looked like faces pressed beneath the bark. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Human, frozen in mid-scream, eyes rolled back, mouths open. Their features warped and merged into one another, as if the tree had absorbed them over time. Morgan whimpered. "It's not a forest. It's one thing." The humming started again, not above, but here, below, vibrating through the wood and through my bones. Luke grabbed the flashlight, sweeping it across the chamber, and the light caught something else. A shape near the base of the trunk, half covered in roots. It was a body, human, or what was left of one. Its face was pale, leathery, eyes hollowed out, and across its chest, carved into the flesh, were words that looked burned rather than cut. "It grew me back." Morgan started screaming. The sound echoed through the chamber, swallowed by the humming, until the forest screamed back. A deep, resonant roar that made my teeth ache. The roots surged upward, wrapping around her legs, her waist, her arms. I lunged for her, grabbing her hand to stop, but the bark spread over her skin like mold. It wasn't dragging her down, it was growing through her, skin hardening, veins darkening. Her voice broke. Help me. And then she wasn't there. Just bark. Just roots. Luke turned and ran deeper into the chamber, swinging his hatchet wildly, screaming at the walls, hacking at everything that moved. Each strike sent sap spraying, but every cut sealed itself almost instantly. The forest wasn't dying, it was healing. He tripped, it fell to his knees, and the roots swarmed him. His body arched once, then stilled. I ran. I don't know how long, maybe minutes, maybe hours. I remember the tunnel narrowing, the smell of soil turning to rot, my flashlight flickering out. I clawed upward, dirt filling my mouth, lungs screaming, and then light. I burst through the surface and collapsed, gasping. The forest around me was quiet again, still. No fog, no humming, just sunlight breaking through the canopy. For a long time, I lay there, too afraid to move. When I finally stood, everything looked normal. The trees were thinner, younger. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. No service, but the GPS loaded instantly this time. The map showed me exactly where I was, right at the same clearing where we'd first camped. The truck was there too, clean, untouched, like nothing had ever happened. I stumbled toward it. The air was warm, birds sang, the river nearby glittered in the sun. For a moment, I believed I'd made it out. Then I noticed the dashboard. A small sprout had pushed through the vent, green and delicate, unfurling its first leaves toward the light. And when I looked closer, I saw that the leaves weren't shaped like any plant I knew. They were shaped like fingers. I reached for the ignition, but my hands froze. The veins under my skin were darker now, tracing up my wrist like roots. I could feel it moving, slow, patient, beneath the surface. The forest hadn't let me go. It had only planted me somewhere else. The man who slept under the wrong stars. I remember the first night like it was yesterday, the night the world went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. You don't really notice how the woods breathe until something takes that breath away. The pines around me were tall and dark, the kind that keep secrets even when the wind asks for them. The air was sharp with the smell of sap and cold soil, and the stars, God, the stars looked endless. It was supposed to be just another solo backpacking trip, something I did every year to clear my head and remind myself that silence isn't the same as loneliness. But that night, as I lay on my back staring up at the sky, I realized something was wrong. I couldn't find a single constellation I knew. Not Orion, not the Big Dipper, nothing. The sky was full of light, yes, but none of it made sense. It was like I was looking at a sky from some other place. Some other time. My name doesn't really matter. I was 32 then, a quiet man who'd spent too much of his life chasing mountains because flat land made me feel trapped. I grew up in northern Arizona where the sky feels closer than anywhere else on Earth. I'd seen meteors, supermoons, fire lookouts glowing like stars of their own. I wasn't new to wilderness, and I wasn't easy to scare. But that night, under those strange, unfamiliar stars, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid lost in the dark. The sense that the world had quietly shifted, just a fraction, and I wasn't supposed to be here to notice it. I had hiked deep into the San Francisco peaks, far past the trails where tourists stop. I'd been following a ridge where the forest thinned just enough to give me a clear view of the valley below. It was late October, that season when the forest seems to hold its breath between fall and winter. I had set up camp on a flat patch of dirt not far from a dry creek bed, the kind that only runs after heavy snowmelt. My pack was beside me, my boots still dusted with red earth. I remember watching the last light fade from the horizon and thinking about how peaceful it was to be away from people. No phone signal, no hum of traffic, just the faint rustle of needles overhead and the occasional distant cry of something wild. When I drifted off, I remember hearing something faint, a soft tapping, like twigs brushing against nylon. But it didn't sound close. It was rhythmic, almost intentional. I assumed it was just the forest settling or maybe a branch moving in the wind. I I pulled my sleeping bag tighter and let myself fall deeper into that kind of wilderness sleep. Half rest, half vigilance. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke up. It wasn't a sound that woke me, it was the silence. The forest had gone still in that unnatural way it does before a storm or before a predator comes close. I blinked my eyes open, expecting to see the outline of the pines above me, but what I saw made my chest tighten. The stars had shifted, not just a few of them, all of them. The sky looked wrong. I sat up slowly, my breath visible in the cold air. The constellations that had guided me my whole life were gone, replaced by patterns I couldn't recognize. The stars were brighter too, almost sharp, like they were closer than they should be. It felt like standing beneath a ceiling of lights that someone had rearranged while I slept. I tried to calm myself with logic. Maybe cloud cover had rolled in and distorted the view. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I noticed the ridgeline to my left. It wasn't where it should have been. The dark silhouette of the mountain had shifted positions against the sky. That's when a cold realization crept through me. Either I had moved, or the world around me had. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward my gear. Everything looked the same: my sleeping bag, my water bottle, the small fire pit I'd built before bed. But there was one thing that made my throat tighten. Right beside me, where my backpack had been, was another one, a different one. Larger, darker, worn from years of use, and mine was gone. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe I'd wandered in my sleep and somehow set my pack down next to someone else's camp. Maybe a hiker had stumbled on my sight and left their bag by mistake. But when I shone the light around me, I saw no other tents, no footprints, no gear. Just that other pack sitting beside me like it had always been there. I reached for it. The fabric was cold, damp with dew. The zipper was old, half rusted. When I opened it, I found things that didn't make sense. An old map of the same region, but the markings were wrong. Roads that didn't exist anymore. Campgrounds I'd never heard of. There was a compass inside too, but when I tried to line it up, the needle spun slowly, never settling north. There was also a small metal tin with a matchbox inside, and next to it something wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a photograph, black and white, the edges cracked from age. It showed a man standing beside a campfire, wearing a wool jacket and holding a lantern. The trees behind him looked exactly like the ones around me. His face was blurred, but his stance, his posture, it was familiar. Too familiar. I remember whispering into the dark, "Who are you?" The words hung there, unanswered. I should have packed up and left right then, but something about that photograph rooted me in place. I felt like I'd just stepped into someone else's unfinished story. Maybe the man in the picture had once stood exactly where I was, staring at a sky that didn't belong to him either. The night stretched on, colder now. The stars pulsed faintly above, and I had the strangest feeling that they were watching me. That they weren't just points of light, they were eyes, distant but aware. I lay there until exhaustion pulled me back into a half sleep, the photograph still in my hand. When dawn came, it didn't rise from the east. I woke to the sound of birds, but when I opened my eyes, the horizon was glowing in the wrong direction. The sun was climbing from the west, painting the forest in a golden light that shouldn't exist. I stood up too fast, my legs trembling. Everything around me looked the same: trees, rocks, the dry creek bed, but it all felt reversed, like I was inside a mirror of the world I'd fallen asleep in. I picked up the old pack again. Inside, beneath the map and the photo, I found a small leather journal. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting jagged, uneven. The first line read, "If you wake under the wrong stars, don't follow the sunrise. It doesn't lead home." That was when I realized I wasn't lost in the forest. The forest had lost me. I remember my hands trembling as I turned the pages, careful not to tear the old paper. Each page was filled with short, broken entries, as if whoever wrote them was running out of time. The handwriting grew messier as it went on, like the writer was shaking when they wrote. "The woods shift at night," one line read. "Landmarks disappear when the stars move. Don't sleep near the creek. The water remembers where you were. I read those words over and over, trying to convince myself this was some elaborate prank, maybe an old ranger's story meant to scare hikers. But the paper felt too real, the dirt too old, and the sense of familiarity too strong. I packed the journal and the photo into my jacket pocket and began to hike. I thought if I could just get to higher ground, I'd be able to orient myself, see where the sun really was, find a trail, anything. But the forest didn't look the same anymore. The trees felt closer together. The air was heavier, as if the woods had aged overnight. Even the smell had changed, from pine and soil to something faintly metallic, like rain before a lightning strike. Every few minutes I'd check my compass again, hoping it would finally pick a direction. It never did. The needle just spun lazily, as though it couldn't decide what north meant anymore. I tried to laugh it off. "You're just tired," I told myself. "You're dehydrated. You're fine." But the forest didn't echo my voice like it used to. Normally, in deep woods, you can hear yourself bounce off the trees. Here, the sound just disappeared, absorbed into the quiet. After an hour of walking, I came across a campsite, or what was left of one. A torn canvas tent, half buried under pine needles, a rusted stove, the faint outline of a fire ring covered in moss. It looked old, decades old. I crouched beside it, brushing away debris, and found something in the ashes, a melted metal cup, and beside it another photograph. The same man, the same jacket, but this time his face wasn't blurred. He was looking directly into the camera, eyes dark and hollow, his expression somewhere between fear and disbelief. I don't know what made me look behind me, but I did, and for the first time I saw movement. Not human, not animal, but something in the way the light shifted between the trees, like the shadows had learned how to breathe. My pulse jumped. I grabbed a branch, swung it through the air, expecting to hit something, but there was only emptiness. Still, that strange movement stayed just at the edge of my vision, like it was following me from tree to tree. I started walking faster. The forest floor was soft, muffled, my boots sinking slightly into damp soil. I noticed then that the air didn't feel cold anymore. It felt wrong. Too still, too dense, like I was walking underwater. The light filtering through the branches had a faint green tint to it, and the sun, no matter how far I walked, never rose higher than a few inches above the horizon. At some point, I realized I was walking in circles. No matter which direction I went, I kept coming back to the same dry creek bed, the same curve of stone, the same patch of ground where my camp had been. I knew because the old backpack was still sitting there, only now it wasn't alone. There were two packs. One was the old one, worn and faded. The other was new. Mine. My throat went dry. I stood there, staring at the two of them side by side, just like before, except this time I hadn't fallen asleep. I'd been gone for hours. I took a step back. The air behind me felt thick, like it didn't want me to move. I forced myself to look up at the sky. The stars weren't visible yet, but the sun had already begun to sink, and it was still setting in the east. That's when I realized something deeper than fear was settling into me. It wasn't that I was trapped, it was that something in this place wanted me to understand it before it let me go. I opened my pack, looking for my GPS. It was dead. My phone too, no battery, no signal, nothing. It was as if all my devices had aged overnight. The plastic on the flashlight had become brittle. Even the metal zipper on my tent flap had tarnished. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. My body ached with fatigue, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I took the journal out again and turned to the last page. The handwriting was frantic, scrawled across the page like the writer hadn't had time to finish. It said, "The forest doesn't move, you do." And below it, scratched faintly into the paper, were two words I'll never forget: trade places. I stared at that phrase for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Trade places? With who? Or with what? My eyes drifted toward the photograph again, to the man standing under the same trees, holding that lantern, his eyes staring right through me. It hit me then. What if the reason the sky looked wrong wasn't because I had gone somewhere new, but because something had taken my place where I'd been? Night was coming again. The woods began to hum with that strange, electric silence. The stars would be out soon, and I didn't know if they'd be the same as before, or worse, if they'd be waiting for me. I knew I couldn't sleep, not after what I'd read. But exhaustion is a dangerous thing in the wild. It makes you careless, makes you want to surrender. I remember building a small fire, feeding it with broken twigs just to have something real, something I could control. The flames flickered weakly, their light barely pushing against the darkness. I thought about leaving the packs, about running until the trees broke into open sky. But the forest didn't look like it wanted to let me go. Every direction felt the same. Every shadow leaned closer. And then, as I sat there staring into the fire, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the direction of the creek. I froze. The sound wasn't like an animal, it was too deliberate. I reached for the fire poker, my hands shaking. The footsteps stopped just beyond the firelight. I could feel eyes on me. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice sounded small, like swallowed by the night. Silence. Then, faintly, I heard something drop onto the ground near the fire. A photograph. I reached for it carefully, heart hammering. When I turned it over, my blood ran cold. It was me, standing by the fire, holding a lantern. And behind me, in the dark, the same blurred figure I'd seen in the other photo, only this time, the blur wasn't hiding his face. It was smiling. I don't remember dropping the photograph, but I remember the sound it made when it hit the dirt, a soft flutter like the wings of something too light to belong in this place. My body locked up, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't look away from that photograph lying in the firelight. The edges were singed, curling upward, but the image stayed clear. Me in the same jacket, same boots, same fire. But the figure behind me, the one smiling, was now only a few steps away in that frozen frame. I could almost feel its breath on the back of my neck. I turned slowly. The woods behind me looked empty, still, but I could sense it there. Something standing just beyond the circle of light. The shadows between the trees seemed thicker than before, as though they were made of something heavier than darkness. And in that silence, I heard a faint rustle, something dragging across the forest floor. Not a footstep, not an animal's movement, but something like fabric brushing against bark. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself. "You're tired. You're imagining this." But the fire flickered violently, and I swear for an instant I saw the outline of a man, my height, my build, standing where the trees began. The flames stretched toward him like they were reaching for something familiar. Then he moved, just slightly, and I saw his head tilt in a slow, unnatural way, like someone studying their own reflection for the first time. I took one step back. The figure didn't move. 2 steps. The fire popped behind me. My eyes burned with smoke and fear. I tried to speak again, but my voice caught in my throat. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure was gone. Only the forest remained, quiet and patient. The night air pressed close, cold again. I looked down, and the photograph was gone too, just a faint outline in the dirt where it had been. That was when I heard the whisper. It came from behind me, close enough that I felt it in my ear. A single word, hoarse, low, but unmistakably my own voice, said, "Stay." Every hair on my body stood on end. I turned around so fast I nearly fell into the fire, but there was nothing. Just the dry creek bed, the 2 packs sitting side by side, and that endless stretch of black sky above me. The stars had shifted again. New patterns, new arrangements, like the heavens themselves were being rewritten while I stood there watching. The fear that hit me then wasn't sharp, it was deep. The kind of fear that settles into your bones when you realize the world doesn't need to follow its own rules. I grabbed my pack, my real one, and began to run. I didn't care which direction. I just ran. Branches whipped my arms, roots caught my feet, and the night seemed to close in tighter the faster I moved. Every now and then I'd hear the faint echo of footsteps behind me, perfectly timed with mine, as though the forest was mocking me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Eventually, the trees opened into a clearing. I stumbled out into it, gasping for breath. the cold air cutting deep into my lungs. The ground here was softer, carpeted with pine needles, and in the middle of the clearing stood something that didn't belong. A cabin. It was small and slanted, roof half collapsed, walls eaten by moss and time. I knew I should have kept running, but any sign of shelter pulled me forward. I pushed open the warped door. It creaked like a dying tree. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The smell of old smoke clung to the wood. There was a table, a broken chair, and in the corner, a wood stove filled with ash. And on the table, another photograph. This one was different, newer. My breath hitched when I saw it. It was a picture of me standing right there in that same cabin doorway. The firelight from my camp flickering behind me. I backed away slowly, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The walls felt like they were bending closer. Every instinct told me to leave, but the floor groaned beneath me, and when I turned, I saw something carved into the doorframe. Words etched deep into the wood. We wake where they dream. I didn't understand it then, but I felt it. That phrase sank into me like a cold nail. I stepped back into the clearing, desperate for air. The forest was utterly still. I turned in a slow circle, trying to find the trail, the ridge, anything familiar. But the world was wrong again. The mountains were in the wrong places, the stars still shifting. I realized then that I couldn't hear the river anymore, or the wind. Even the sound of my breathing seemed distant. And then I saw the light. It flickered between the trees, a faint glow moving slowly toward me. My first thought was a lantern, maybe another camper, maybe help. But as it came closer, the light didn't cast shadows. It didn't illuminate anything. It just was. A single hovering glow moving without sound. I took a step toward it, and it stopped. Then it pulsed faintly like it was breathing. My voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The light dimmed, then flared bright. Blindingly bright, and I saw for a split second what was inside it. The same face from the photographs. Mine. I fell backward, eyes burning, and the forest went completely dark again. When I opened them, the light was gone. Only the stars remained, but they weren't where they'd been before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by what was left of my fire until dawn, staring into the trees, waiting for the sun to rise. And when it did, when that first line of light crept across the horizon, it came from neither east nor west. It came from above, bleeding through the canopy like it had been there all along. The forest glowed in that impossible dawn. Every color was strange. Greens too deep, shadows too long, the air humming faintly as if the world was vibrating beneath my skin. I realized then that I hadn't just lost my way. I'd crossed into something that didn't have directions anymore. But the strangest part wasn't what I saw. It was what I felt. Peace. For the first time since waking under those unfamiliar stars, I wasn't afraid. It was as if some quiet understanding had settled inside me, that maybe I wasn't supposed to fight my way out. Maybe some places aren't meant to be escaped. Maybe they're meant to be understood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the journal again. The pages fluttered in the soft morning wind, and for the first time, I noticed something new written on the inside cover, faint but visible in the rising light. If you wake where the stars are wrong, remember, someone once woke where yours are right. I stood there for a long time, the words echoing through me like a heartbeat. Then I turned and looked back at the forest, the cabin, the world that had quietly rearranged itself around me. Somewhere out there, under another sky, maybe someone was waking up beside my pack, wondering why the sun rose in the wrong direction. And maybe, just maybe, they were holding my photograph too. I left that clearing sometime mid-morning, though I don't think the word morning meant the same thing there. The light stayed in that strange half-glow, never growing brighter, never dimming. It was like walking through the last hour before sunset stretched across an endless day. Every direction I turned seemed to lead deeper into the same forest, the same trees repeating themselves as if I were trapped inside an echo. But something had changed in me. The fear had thinned, replaced by a strange calm. I was still lost, still disoriented, but part of me began to see the beauty in that wrongness. The way the light scattered differently through the leaves, the rhythm of the forest breathing in patterns I couldn't understand. It was terrifying, yes, but there was meaning buried in that terror. Something ancient, something waiting to be remembered. I followed the sound of wind, or what I thought was wind. It moved through the forest like a voice, rising and fading, always just far enough ahead that I had to keep walking to hear it. It reminded me of something my grandfather once said back when he used to take me camping near the Mogollon Rim. The woods aren't empty, boy. They're listening. You just have to be quiet enough to hear what they're saying. For the first time since I'd woken under that wrong sky, I listened. I slowed my steps, stopped crunching twigs beneath my boots. The air was still, but I could feel movement all around me, tiny vibrations in the ground, a faint hum in the air. The forest wasn't dead. It was alive in a language I'd never learned to hear. And when I finally grew quiet enough, I understood what it was saying. It wasn't words, it was memory. The kind that doesn't belong to one person, but to the land itself. That's when I saw the trail. Barely there at first, just a thin break in the underbrush, but as I followed it, the forest began to open up again. The trees grew older, thicker, their bark a deep gray instead of brown. The ground beneath them was littered with dry leaves that didn't crunch when I stepped on them. They just shifted, soft and soundless. After an hour, or what felt like an hour, I saw smoke rising in the distance, thin, gray, curling through the trees. I froze. My first thought was that someone else was here. Another traveler, another person trapped in this mirror world of the woods. I hurried forward, drawn by the smell of burning pine. When I reached the clearing, my heart almost stopped. There was a fire pit in the center, a ring of stones, a tent beside it, my tent, my gear, my sleeping bag, my footprints clear in the soil. But the fire was lit, and sitting beside it was a man, his back to me, shoulders hunched, head tilted forward like he'd been waiting. I could see my own jacket on his back, my jacket, my hat, the same tears and the same fabric. I didn't move at first. I just stood there watching the rise and fall of his shoulders, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Every part of me screamed that this couldn't be real. I wanted to call out, but I couldn't find my voice. So I stepped closer. The man stirred. Slowly he turned his head, and the world seemed to stop. It was me. Not a reflection, not an illusion. Me. Every detail, right down to the scar near my eyebrow. But his eyes were different. Darker. Tired. He looked at me with something that wasn't surprise, wasn't fear, just a quiet understanding. Like he'd been expecting me all along. He didn't speak. He just pointed toward the fire where a photograph lay beside the flames. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I picked it up. It was the same picture again, me beside the campfire, and behind me, the blurred figure. Only this time, the blur was gone. The figure behind me was the man sitting across the fire. Me. I wanted to ask him what this meant, what was happening, but when I opened my mouth, he finally spoke. "You fell asleep under the wrong stars," he said, his voice low, rough, and quiet, "and now you're where I was." I shook my head. "What is this place?" He stared into the fire. "It's the space between what the forest remembers and what it forgets. Every few years, someone like us slips through. A camper, a hiker, someone who trusts the quiet too much. The sky changes, the sun moves, and you wake up where you don't belong. The only way back is through the one who came before you." I didn't understand. "Through?" He looked up, and for a moment his face looked older, weathered, almost transparent in the flickering light. "When I found this place, there was someone waiting for me too. I didn't believe him. I tried to fight it. But you can't leave until someone takes your place." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My throat went dry. "You mean you were me?" He smiled faintly, but it wasn't a kind smile. "No, you're me now." Before I could speak, the fire flared high, throwing sparks into the air. The wind picked up, a low hum moving through the trees like a deep breath. The man stood, walked around the fire, and for the first time I noticed the ground beneath his feet. His footprints didn't leave impressions. The dirt didn't move. He stopped a few steps away, looking at me with something like sadness. "I'm tired," he said. "More tired than you can imagine. I've been waiting a long time for someone to wake under the wrong stars." And then he reached out his hand. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't listen. There was something magnetic in the space between us, something pulling me forward. My hand lifted on its own, slow, inevitable. The closer our hands got, the colder the air became. The fire hissed, the light dimming until the world seemed to fold into shadow. When our fingertips touched, I saw everything. The nights he'd wandered, the faces he'd seen in the dark, the endless cycle of waking in someone else's life. I saw the moment he had found his own double years ago. The same fear in his eyes that now lived in mine. I saw him take the hand extended to him, and I saw the fire burn down to ash. And then I saw nothing. The world blinked. When I opened my eyes again, the fire was smaller, crackling quietly. The air smelled like pine and smoke. I was sitting where he had sat. The other man, the older me, was gone. Only one pack remained beside me. I stood slowly, the weight of understanding sinking in. The forest was quiet again, the stars above rearranging themselves into patterns I could almost recognize, almost. I reached into the pack and found the same old photograph, now faded, nearly white. Behind it, the journal, a new line written in shaky handwriting. "Someone will wake soon. When they do, tell them the stars are beautiful." I looked up at the sky. The constellations were still wrong, but somehow they felt familiar now. The forest seemed to breathe again, calm and endless. And I finally understood the truth. I hadn't been lost. I had been chosen to remember what others forget, that some paths aren't meant to lead home. Some are meant to keep the world balanced between what's seen and unseen, between what dreams and what wakes. So I sat there beneath that strange eternal sky and whispered into the quiet, "The stars are beautiful." Somewhere, maybe under a familiar night sky, someone stirred in their sleep, the forest holding its breath, waiting for them to wake. And when they did, they'd look up, confused, at the constellations they no longer recognized, and find my pack beside them.